I woke up gasping for air, with a corpse pressing down on me. I was buried under a pile of dead bodies. I looked down. There were 2 deep, bone-deep cuts on each wrist. Same on my knees. I tried to make a fist. My fingers could only twitch slightly. All my tendons were severed. A total cripple. Memories flooded my mind. My name is Lu Zhen, 18-year-old martial arts champion. From a poor family. 10 years of hard training. Finally reached the top in one day. At the celebration banquet, I was forced drunk. Woke up lying on a princess's bed. The emperor was furious. Accused me of disturbing the royal palace. Ordered my hands and feet to be crippled. And threw me into a mass grave. Left me to die. The original owner of this body died in agony after 3 days. But the first, a 21st century office worker who died suddenly at my desk, was reborn into this broken body. Before I could even finish cursing, I was jolted awake. Noise came from the edge of the pit. It was the howl of wolves. A wild wolf circled close. The leader jumped into the pit first. Then the whole pack followed. I quickly looked around. There was a corpse nearby. A dagger tucked at the waist. I gritted my teeth, propped myself up with my elbows, dragged my crippled body forward inch by inch. Then my fingers hooked onto the dagger's hilt. A gray wolf lunged at me with a bloody maw. I couldn't dodge, even if I tried. I reversed my grip on the dagger and slashed at the gray wolf with all my remaining strength. The wolf convulsed a few times and went still. The other 6 wolves froze in shock. I lay in a pool of blood, covered in wounds, hands completely crippled, roared at them, told them I was crippled anyway. Might as well take a few more down with me. At that moment, I heard a trembling girl's voice, calling my name. I hurriedly looked around and quickly replied. At the edge of the pit stood a girl around 14 or 15, wearing a patched cotton jacket, holding an old worn-out longbow. Her face was pale, eyes red and swollen. When she saw me, tears streamed down her face. She cried out my name and rushed down. Qingluo rolled and crawled to the pit, seeing me covered in blood, tendons in my hands and feet severed. She hugged me and broke down crying. Her thin shoulders shook, almost beyond control. Before I could say a word, she carried me on her back, for 20 miles on mountain roads. She wore a patched cotton jacket. Her shoulders ached from carrying me, her steps heavy as lead. Sweat soaked through the jacket, yet she walked unbelievably steady. Never dared to pause once. All the way she cried to me, "Mom," she said, "when you were punished." She coughed up blood immediately. The doctor said it was years of hard work that broke her health. She was only hanging on through sheer willpower. Needed 5 taels of silver for medicine to save her life. But there was not a penny left at home. When she got me back to our 3 crumbling, drafty mud houses, I finally saw what my mother looked like. She was nothing but skin and bones. Cheekbones sunken deep, skin waxy and yellow, lying on the cold earthen bed, barely able to open her eyes. But the moment she saw me, a bright light flashed in her cloudy eyes. Her bony hand gripped mine tightly, unwilling to let go, muttering my name over and over. The moment she spoke, a fit of coughing racked her body. The blood she coughed up stained the handkerchief red. In modern times, I lost my mother at 10. There wasn't even anyone there to see her off. Now I've crossed to this world, and I have a mother who gave everything to send me to school and train me in martial arts, who raised me no matter what. I absolutely cannot just watch as she leaves me forever. I searched all over my body, only to find the jade pendant for the martial champion. This is my only bargaining chip, and my mother's only hope to survive. I held the pendant tight, looked at the red-eyed Qingluo, and asked hoarsely if she knew the way to the county pawn shop. "Do you know the way?" Qingluo carried me for a whole 20 miles through the mountains, carrying this cripple with severed tendons, and brought me to the county's largest pawn shop, leaning on a stick I found along the way. I forced myself to stand up straight, stood on tiptoe, and handed the only martial champion's jade pendant onto the counter. This is the life-saving money for my mother, my only bargaining chip right now. But as I looked up, I ran into Zhao Gong, that troublemaker from the village. He immediately started mocking me in a weird tone, slandered that the pendant was stolen goods. The shopkeeper's face changed immediately. A pendant worth at least 20 taels. He only offered 2 taels. I couldn't help but laugh. right in front of everyone. Exposed Zhao Go for working for the village chief, Qian Mangguan. Even exposed him for stealing chickens from Widow Liu last month. And losing 3 tails at the gambling den.
Laid all his dirty deeds out bare.
The shopkeeper's face changed again. He backed down and ended up giving me 10 taels. Finally enough for my mother's life-saving medicine. I took the silver and the pawn ticket, grabbed my crutch, and turned to leave. Before leaving, I stared at Zhao Gong, warning him, word for word, not to covet the Lu family's broken house again. But as I left the pawn shop, out of the corner of my eye, I saw his snake-like venomous glare, locked onto my back. I knew clearly in my heart, this was far from over. Qingluo carried me full speed for 20 miles of mountain road, her legs shaking as if she could barely stand, but still gritted her teeth, never stopped, got me home at last. The moment I entered the yard, ignoring the searing pain of my torn wounds, I had Qingluo help me light the fire and prepare the medicine. Every movement, pain seared through the scars on my wrists and knees, but I couldn't stop. Lying on that bed was my only mother in this world, who ruined her eyesight doing laundry for others, and gave everything for her son to become a martial arts champion. When the medicine was ready, I carefully fed it to her spoon by spoon. Her bony hand gripped mine for dear life, her cloudy eyes brimming with tears. After drinking the medicine, that waxy, haggard face finally showed a trace of color. For the next 3 days, I didn't let Qingluo allow anyone inside, endured the agony of my wounds, and with her set up all kinds of defenses around the house, splashed oil all over the doorway, hung a tripwire behind the door, put buckets full of heavy objects on the rafters. All skills I learned from survival shows in my previous life. Tricks to keep myself alive. Qingluo had no idea what any of this was for, but didn't ask a single question, just silently handed me ropes and buckets. Her eyes filled with absolute trust. The 4th night, silence all around. I lay on the bed, not closing my eyes, tightly gripping the dagger I brought from the mass grave. Right then, there was a rustling sound outside the door. Someone was prying the door bolt bit by bit. Sure enough, Zhao Go showed up with his men. With a creak, the bolt was completely forced open. 3 shadows crouched low and slipped in. I clutched the knife I brought from the mass grave. Sitting on the Kong, I didn't move a muscle, coldly watching as they stepped closer to me. They won't die a good death. The first guy to charge in stepped right onto the floor drenched in vegetable oil, and went down hard, falling just in time to knock over the nearby manure bucket. Yellow and white filth drenched him all over. A pungent stench exploded in the air immediately.
He clutched his mouth, coughing his lungs out.
The next guy hadn't reacted yet, when a whistling wind sounded overhead. The wooden tub hanging from the beam came crashing down on his head. His eyes rolled back, and he passed out cold on the spot. Only Zhao Go was left, his eyes red with rage.
He swung a hatchet, trying to avoid the chaos on the floor,
roaring as he lunged at me, determined to hack this cripple to death. I sat on the Kong, not dodging, just waited for him to get within 3 steps. Suddenly yanked the hemp rope in my hand. The preset noose snapped tight instantly, locking his ankle down hard, hoisting him upside down, head down, feet up in the air. The hatchet slipped from his hand and hit the floor. His whole body hung swinging in the air. His arrogant cursing instantly turned to screams. Qingluo came rushing out from behind the door with a fire poker and smashed Zhao Go's head hard, crying and cursing him for bullying us. A girl who usually didn't dare speak loudly now erupted with incredible fierceness for me. Early next morning, we tied the 3 thieves to the old locust tree at the village entrance. Villagers gathered, crowding the place, and whispered among themselves, all amazed at this crippled former champion. But just then, the crowd suddenly parted. Village Chief Qian Mangguan stormed over with his men, face dark. He immediately scolded me harshly for taking justice into my own hands, accused me of having no respect for the law. Qian Mangguan waved his hand, and his cronies quickly untied Zhao Go and the other 2. From the old locust tree, Zhao Go was covered in filth, his face swollen like a pig's head, held up by others, still grinning and cursing at me, saying he'd kill me no matter what.
Tan Mangguan shot him a hard glare first,
and told him to shut up, then turned to me with a fake smile plastered on his face. That phony, tigerish grin turned my stomach. He stroked his goatee and pretended to say it's great for young men to have spirit. But rules are rules. I beat these people up without permission. By rights, I should be sent to the authorities. But for the sake of us being neighbors, he wouldn't make it hard on me. As long as I paid 5 taels of silver as a housing tax, the matter would be settled. Qing Luo's eyes turned red with anxiety on the spot. She stood in front of me and shouted, "There's never been any housing tax in the village. This is plain daylight robbery." I raised my hand to stop her, glared at Qian Mengguan, and exposed his true face, word by word. "The 3 acres of land my father left me, you seized long ago, claiming it was public land. The rent that should have been shared with every family each year. I never saw a single grain. Now you're extorting me for a housing tax. Afraid I'm staying too long in the village, and will eventually air out your dirty laundry." The crowd instantly started murmuring. Qian Mengguan's fake smile finally collapsed. He shot me a vicious glare and threatened he'd personally come collect in 3 days. If I couldn't pay up, not to blame him for being ruthless. With that, he took his men and slunk away in embarrassment. Qing Luo was so anxious she started crying. Holding my hand, she asked where we'd find 5 taels of silver. How would we get the money together? I gently patted her head and gazed at the endless distant mountains. Deep down I knew, in this cannibalistic world, to protect my sick mother, to shield Qing Luo, to survive, I had no choice but to head into those treacherous mountains and carve out a path of survival against all odds. At the crack of dawn the next day, I had Qing Luo carry me on her back, and we headed deep into the mountains behind the village. Mengguan's demand for 5 taels of silver in 3 days still hung over our heads. A gravely ill mother, a defenseless Qing Luo. I had to take responsibility. We had just reached the foot of the mountain when a figure suddenly darted out from behind the trees. A girl of about 16 or 17. Wearing a short jacket stitched from animal pelts, a hunting bow taller than herself slung across her back, her eyes quick and shrewd, though still betraying a guarded wariness. Her name was Aining, daughter of a hunter from the neighboring village. After losing her parents, she had raised her little brother and sister alone. She heard I was heading into the mountain and wanted to come along for a share of food. I didn't say much more, just silently allowed her to follow us. But we had just entered the forest for less than half an hour, when heavy panting suddenly erupted from the thicket. A wild boar, over 200 jin, burst out, its eyes locked on us, charging madly, rushing straight for us. Aining reacted instantly, drew her bow and fired. But the arrow only grazed the boar's hide, which only infuriated the beast further. At the critical moment, I told Aining to take Qing Luo and hide behind a tree, while I stood my ground, leaning on my crutch without budging. As the boar charged to within 3 steps, I suddenly twisted aside. The boar, unable to stop, crashed headlong into a sharp, lightning-struck stump behind me. It pierced the boar's neck right through. It twitched a few times and was dead. Watching me, Aining had her contempt turned to utter shock. But just as she was about to speak, she froze in place, pointing at the marks on the ground, her voice trembling. I looked down. There was a paw print as big as a clay bowl in the mud, its edges still fresh with earth from a corpse. A tiger had passed through here just last night, staring at the large fresh tiger print in the mud. She told me the tiger had roamed these mountains for 3 years. It had already killed more than a dozen hunters. The local government issued a bounty of 50 taels of silver, but no one had dared take on this deadly task. 10 taels of silver. Those 5 words exploded in my mind. With that money, I could not only fill the hole from Qian Mengguan's extortion, but buy medicine for my mother and nurse her back, and let Qing Luo live without fear with me. More importantly, in this cruel world, maybe lay the foundation to really survive. I immediately told Aining to take me to the tiger's den. Her eyes went wide on the spot, and she said I was crazy, a cripple with severed tendons. Trying to take on a man-eating tiger might as well be asking to die. But I knew better than anyone. The more dangerous the place, the greater the chance for a comeback. Not even 7 wolves in the mass grave had managed to kill me. I didn't believe I would die to some beast. We wandered the mountains for 2 whole days. Aining, familiar with every path, guided me over 2 ridges. and finally stopped at the edge of a cliff. I stood there, scanning the surroundings. A huge cave halfway up the cliff was the tiger's den. Bones and flattened dry grass scattered at the entrance. Then I had Aining bring me to the tiger's cave, memorized every detail of the wind, terrain, exits, cover, etched it all into my mind.
Eining was obviously impatient.
And asked what I was looking at. I just calmly said I was figuring out how to kill it. She stared at me, stunned for a while, and finally blurted out, "You're really crazy." 3 days later, we entered the mountains again. This time, I left myself no way out. 3 days later, I brought Aang back into these deep mountains. I told Aang to fully draw the hunting bow. With one arrow, she hit the tiger right in the belly. The wounded tiger instantly burst into rage. Its eyes locked on us up on the cliff. Roaring, it charged toward us. It was as fast as a raging wind. Aning carried me on her back and ran toward the trap we had prepared in advance. The wind at our backs came closer and closer. The heavy footsteps made the ground tremble. 20 steps, 10 steps, 5 steps right as the tiger lunged to about 30 feet away. I swung my cane and using all my strength smashed the trap's wooden support. The tiger couldn't stop in time and fell headfirst into the trap. Sharpened stakes at the bottom pierced straight through its abdomen. Blood gushed out, yet this beast wasn't dead. Driven by pure ferocity, it clawed its way up to the edge of the pit, inch by inch, covered in blood, with bloodshot eyes staring straight at me. Next second, it opened its bloody jaws and lunged right at me. In the nick of time, I thrust my cane straight into its open maw, holding back its fangs with all my might. Smelly drool dripped all over my face from the stick. I shouted at Aning to shoot its eyes. I heard a sobbing, furious shout behind me. An arrow zipped right past my face, striking the tiger and making its whole body go rigid. It collapsed on top of me with a thud. We dragged the tiger carcass back to the village. But as soon as we reached the entrance, the scene before my eyes made my blood run cold. A dozen officials surrounded my house in a tight circle, dragging the over 200-pound tiger back at the village entrance. The tiger blood on me hadn't even cooled off when I was instantly frozen by what I saw. A dozen constables in black uniforms completely surrounded my family's 3 shabby rooms. My mother was carried out of the house by someone. Her face was pale as paper, with a glaring blood-red mark on her chest. Ching Luo was tied behind her back to the old locust tree. Fresh slap marks covered her face. Her mouth was tightly stuffed with cloth. When she spotted me returning, her tears immediately started to flow. Sun Bao, the county constable, saw the dead tiger I dragged back, and his eyes instantly lit up. He immediately shouted harshly, accusing me of illegal hunting. Said he'd arrest me and take me back to the county office. I ignored the iron ruler and chains in his hand, and didn't even look at the officials closing in. I only glared straight at him, and spoke word by word. Right now, you go call a doctor to treat my mother. It may not be too late. Otherwise, this perfect tiger skin, I'll send to the magistrate as a birthday gift. I just want to see if he needs another reason to demote the county chief. Sun Bao's face changed instantly. And just as things were getting tense, a low voice came from outside the crowd. A man with a scarred face walked in. 4 fingers were missing from his left hand. His right hand was gripping the knife at his waist. The base of his thumb was covered in thick calluses from years of wielding a blade. His name was Yang Qi, a survivor from the mass graves at the border. A retired border soldier. He looked coldly at Sun Bao, calling out that this tiger was the wanted beast that the government put a 50 silver bounty on. If you arrest him today, you should ask the county magistrate first whether he'll still pay out that reward. Sun Bao lost all his swagger and could only leave with the officials and Qian Menguan with their tails between their legs. As they left, I met his venomous gaze and told him, word by word, you pushed my mother and tied up my people. I, Lu Sheng, will remember this debt. Watching their backs as they left, only then did I truly understand that in this cruel world, by myself alone, it's almost impossible to protect the ones I care about. Early the next morning, Scarface came to my door himself. He just stood at my front gate, just stared directly at me, his right hand always on the hilt at his waist.
He introduced himself.
Said his name was Yang Qi. Yesterday, outside the courthouse, he saw with his own eyes that a cripple like me, Used a tiger skin? To scare Sun Bo so bad he'd lose control.
He said there's an iron rule in the border army on the battlefield.
Brains always beat blades. He told me he fought on the border for 30 years and mastered a blade technique that could take an enemy's head among thousands. After retiring, he searched 5 years for a successor, but no one could take 3 moves from him. Yet I, a cripple with tendons cut in hands and feet, dared to challenge the sheriff and use the magistrate to pressure the county office. That takes brains and guts, the one he searched 5 years for. I didn't waste time with him and immediately had Ching Luo go get the best blacksmith in the county. Tai Tu spread out the blade design I had drawn on the table. This was a weapon I designed specifically to counter cavalry on the battlefield, with an extended hilt and a thickened blade, and the center of gravity shifted back. One blow could slice both man and horse in half. Yanji stared at the blueprint. His eyes showed unmistakable shock for the first time. But Tai Tu counted on his fingers for a long time, and then looked up at us. He said to forge this blade, it would take at least 200 taels of silver. Yan Qi shook his head. He said all his money had been spent on the best steel. He didn't have a single coin left. I looked toward the inner room. My mother was still lying on the bed. Even the money for her medicine had to be borrowed by Ching Luo. 200 taels of silver. Where would I find 200 taels? Tai Tu was the best blacksmith in the county, but also the most ill-tempered. 3 years ago, he made a blade for the county, but the price was too high for them, so they only wanted to pay him half. He stood outside the courthouse and cursed for 3 days straight, and was eventually beaten and kicked out of town. I watched him slam his iron cane hard on the ground. Then, with wide eyes, he argued with me about the cost of forging the blade. Even if he put in all his life savings, he could only come up with 50 taels at most. Aning was stomping her feet in frustration beside us. She said we should just sell the tiger skin and bones for money. I shook my head immediately. That was for my mother's health. Even if we are completely broke, I absolutely won't touch it. Yanji sat silently to the side. All his savings went into the best blade steel. Not a single coin left. I looked toward the inner room, at my mother weak and bedridden, at the empty money pouch. For a moment, I was at my wit's end. Just as we were completely out of ideas, Ching Luo suddenly ran to open the door, but was left speechless at the doorstep. Standing there was the top courtesan of Zuyu House. She was dressed in a water-red long dress, with a slender waist. Her every move was full of charm. She walked into the courtyard with a bright smile, and ordered her maid to open a chest. Inside, silver stacked neatly in rows. Not more or less, exactly 200 taels. She said she would lend me the silver, on one condition: help her find a person. As she spoke, she pulled a note from her sleeve and handed it to me. Told me if I get the answer, the silver doesn't have to be repaid. I looked down at the note. There was only one line: Zhou Wu the Chengdong Villa. After accepting Liu Rushi's 200 taels of silver, I immediately ordered Aning to set off, to keep a close eye on Master Zhou from the county town's movements. The mastermind who sent me to the mass grave in the first place. He holds the truth I must uncover. Half a month later, Aning returned to the village under the cover of night. Her face was flushed from the mountain wind, but her eyes shone as she brought back a key clue. On the 15th of every month, Master Zhou would go alone to the secluded villa in the east of the city, and stay there the entire night. But in all that half-month, no second person was ever seen entering or leaving. Something this abnormal can't be good news. I immediately had Eunuch's wife sneak into the villa that night, to investigate what's hidden inside. 2 hours later, Eunuch's wife returned wounded. His face so grim it seemed he could wring water from it. He told me there was a huge secret chamber under that villa. Inside, it's stacked with standard weapons and suits of armor, enough to arm 500 men, privately hoarding military weapons. That's a capital crime for treason that implicates one's entire clan. My mind exploded in an instant. I figured out the truth behind Yuan Shen's death on the spot. It was never about some made-up chaos. All because he was a low-born military scholar, and once he stumbled upon this coup, he was bound to be silenced in advance. Bian Qi and Chen Sheng reminded me Master Zhou is just from a small county, He couldn't possibly get his hands on so many weapons. There must be someone even more powerful behind him. The next day, Liu Rushi came to me alone. She didn't bring any maids. Still smiling, she asked what I had found out. I laid it all out, the secret chamber full of weapons. But after hearing it, her smile vanished in an instant. She was silent for a long time before speaking. She said those weapons weren't what she wanted me to investigate. Someone else asked her to find out. I immediately pressed her to name who was behind it. But she refused to say a word. She only left me with a chilling warning. The person who had her investigate wanted me to know. I also know the man behind Master Zhou. 3 days later, Liu Rushi arranged to meet me at Drunken Moon Pavilion. I didn't bring anyone along, and went alone with my cane. In a private room on the top floor of Drunken Moon Pavilion, across from Liu Rushi sat a woman dressed in white. She was stunningly beautiful, but so cool and distant she felt like midwinter ice. Her gaze was as apathetic as if she were looking at the dead. The chill around her kept everyone at bay. This was the mysterious Jade Fox Liu Rushi mentioned. I got straight to the point, and revealed Master Zhou's weapons hideout under the Eastern Villa. All 500 sets, laid bare. After Liu Rushi heard me out, she turned pale. Jade Fox, however, just sipped her tea calmly, and with a single, casual comment, sent a shock straight through me. She said those weapons were hers. Jade Fox revealed to me that she was the daughter of the deposed crown prince. Back then, Prince Jenin framed her father, leading to the crown prince's entire household being executed. Only she managed to escape. Those weapons were what she'd stashed over 10 years. Her only hope for revenge. It wasn't until this moment that I finally understood. The real culprit who severed my tendons and threw me into the mass grave wasn't who I thought. It was Prince Jenin. He feared my status as a favored, low-born military scholar would threaten his power. So he plotted everything, setting up chaos at the palace and poisoning the examination, determined to eliminate me for good. Turns out we had the same enemy. Jade Fox looked at me, her expression both probing and resolute. She said she could spare some armor to help, but her condition was I must train a personal guard of 30 men for her. Early the next morning, Jade Fox's people arrived. 30 stood in the clearing outside the ruined temple. The oldest was over 40, the youngest barely 15. Some were destitute border troops. Yan Qi frowned, sizing them up, clearly unimpressed by the motley crew. But Jade Fox said, those who survived this chaotic world until now must have some real skills. But they'd also become undisciplined. They just needed strict training. I limped by them on my cane, noticing disdain in their eyes, looking down on me as a cripple. Some gave me a sideways glance, sneering. Others rolled their eyes. No one took me, disabled as I am, seriously at all. I made it clear that Eunuch's wife was their instructor. His word was mine. If anyone was unhappy, they could leave right now. Those who stayed would be grateful for their choice in 10 days. No one left. But their defiance was obvious. In the days that followed, Eunuch led them, starting with the basics, running drills and standing at attention. Some collapsed, some cursed. Any troublemaker got knocked out with a punch from Eunuch. Once awake, it was back to training. Later, they drilled formations, practiced sharpening blades with basic techniques. From chaos at first, to becoming sharp and orderly. In just 10 days, these rookies turned into something impressive. On the 10th day, Tai Tu sent news. The first properly ground blade was finished. Yan Qi took the blade and hacked a log as thick as a bowl. It split clean through, the cut as neat as slicing tofu. He looked at me, eyes full of hope. Told me this was just the beginning. Right when we were excited about the blades, an outpost guard came stumbling in, face pale, yelling that Zhao Go and the Haifengjai were heading their way. They're coming! The Haifengjai are coming! With that shout, the village was instantly in chaos. Women pulled their children inside to hide. The men grabbed hoes and sticks, all their legs trembling in fear. I walked slowly to the village gate with my cane. I saw more than 50 men on horseback, armed with blades, led by a scrawny middle-aged man. A stalk of grass in his mouth. He squinted and looked me up and down. He asked if I was Lu Chan. I said yes. Chewing his grass, he said he was the second leader, and the big boss wanted the tiger I'd hunted, plus 500 taels in compensation. And that would settle the matter. Otherwise, his 50 brothers would spend the night in the village. Right away, Yan Qi reached for his blade and stepped forward. I quickly stopped him. I told second leader I'd go up the mountain with him and talk to the big boss myself, then pointed at Yan Qi and said he'd come with me. Second leader sized up Yan Qi, then looked me up and down this lame man, spat out his grass, then gave us half an hour. Warned if the talks failed, there'd be trouble. Behind me, Jade Fox quietly tried to talk me out of it, said I was crazy. I ignored her and limped after second leader up the mountain. Haifeng Jai was halfway up, surrounded by wooden fences. Scores of bandits patrolled back and forth. Inside the main hall, Zhao Wujie bald brutes sat on a tiger skin chair, his body covered in tattoos, a string of finger bones around his neck, picking his teeth with a knife. He saw me, grinned, showing yellowed teeth, and invited me to sit. Yan Qi stood behind me, hand always on his sword's hilt. Zhao Wuji asked about the tiger pelt. I said I didn't bring it. He asked about the money. I said I didn't bring that either. His knife froze midair. I looked him in the eye and suddenly told him his stronghold wouldn't last 3 months. He paused in shock and asked what I meant. I pointed outside and explained that even though the stronghold was built halfway up the mountain, making it easy to defend and hard to attack, once winter passed the East Pass, a team of skilled soldiers could sneak in easily. And there wasn't even a watchtower facing east. If a fight broke out, they could storm the gates within a stick of incense. Zhao Wuji's expression changed, and he stared at me for a long time. Suddenly he laughed, plunged his knife into the table, and told me to continue. Zhao Wuji stared at me. His gaze was full of uncertainty. He started to question me. Did I really think his fortress couldn't be defended? I told him that he knew the answer himself. Then I pointed outside the stockade. I said the mountain pass to the east is less than 2 li away from the stockade. When the leaves fall in winter, you can see everything clearly. As long as intruders move quickly, his sentries simply wouldn't have time to react. The second in command next to him couldn't help but sneer, mocking that a cripple like me wouldn't understand anything. I replied with a smile, told him to take 50 men down the mountain, but my village had 300 people. If it really came down to a fight, they might not even make it back alive. The second in command's face changed instantly. Zhao Wuji raised his hand to stop him and told me to go on. I paused briefly, then said I didn't want to talk compensation, only about cooperation. I'd help him reinforce the fortress, and he'd protect my village. Zhao Wuji looked me up and down, with doubt written all over his face. He asked what a cripple could possibly do. I replied confidently that I could make this fortress withstand an assault of even 1,000 men. I pulled out a few sheets prepared for something else and spread them out on the table, explaining my ideas as I sketched. I said we should build extra towers near the mountain pass, dig trenches, set tripwires, and lay traps. At first, Zhao Wuji seemed indifferent, but as he watched, his eyes lit up. He asked if all these ideas were mine. I told him that yes, I'd drawn all of them. The main hall was silent except for the crackling of torches. Zhao Wuji was quiet for a long time, then slapped his thigh and agreed to the deal. He told me to leave the designs behind, and said everything from before could be written off. I said I'd leave the drawings, but the 500 taels would be a deposit, and his men must not step into my village. He thought about it for a moment, then called for drinks. We picked up our cups, and he said I was now a friend of Haifeng Fort. I drained my cup in one go. After dark, Yan Qi and I left the stronghold. Halfway down the mountain, he praised my brain as being sharper than the border army's generals. I just smiled, saying nothing. At this moment, I saw in the crowd The white figure of Jade Fox flashed by. He nodded at me and disappeared. Into the night. I was full of questions. Why was he here? My mother's illness suddenly took a turn for the worse. That night, she coughed for 2 whole hours. Each handkerchief changed was soaked with blood. As dawn approached, her face was as pale as paper, her breathing so weak it was almost inaudible. Qingluo was sobbing anxiously, kneeling by the bed and constantly wiping blood from my mother's mouth. Right then, a Ning burst in from outside. She looked at my mother's condition, immediately grabbed me, and said she knew a traveling doctor named Qing Jiyu, the best physician in the county. But Qing Jiyu was wanted by the authorities for being responsible for the death of the county magistrate's concubine. I was silent for a second, but didn't hesitate. I only said 2 words to Ning, lead the way. We found Qing Jiyu hiding in a ruined temple in the mountains. Pushing open the broken door, a strong smell of medicine rushed out. A woman in her 30s was squatting in a corner, decocting herbs. Her hair was a mess, and her white coat was covered in stains. Without looking up, she mumbled that she could treat the illness, but not to come after her if the patient died. I replied I wouldn't thank her even if she succeeded. Only said my mother was dying. Only then did she glance at me, and went back to brewing medicine. She said she'd leave with me after finishing the bowl. After the time it takes an incense stick to burn, she followed me back home. Qing Jiyu lifted the quilt and checked my mother's pulse, then checked her eyes. Her face grew more serious. She said my mother was worn out and suffered emotional trauma, and that there was almost no hope. Luckily, the last prescription I gave had kept her hanging on. I anxiously asked if she could be saved. She said we could try, but would need one ingredient, wild ginseng over 100 years old. She added it's valuable but nearly impossible to find. Money can't buy it. It's just luck in the deep mountains. But that area has tigers. As soon as she finished speaking, Ning stood up immediately, saying he'd go, grabbing his hunting bow, and left without looking back. I called after him, but he didn't turn around. Over the next 3 days, my mother's condition kept going back and forth. Qing Jiyu kept her alive with other medicines, but mother's face just looked worse, day after day. Qingluo stayed at her bedside, her eyes swollen like walnuts. On the 4th day, someone suddenly banged on the gate. A boy about 7 or 8 stumbled in, crying as he called for me, and told me A Ning had been captured by Haifeng Fort. Yan Qi had returned, but he was alone, and he was wounded. His left arm had a large gash, and blood dripping from his elbow. In a low voice, he told me, Zhao Wuji had turned on us, and said A Ning was caught stealing on their turf, and they wanted us to pay 500 taels to ransom him. Qingluo was so scared she covered her mouth. I stayed silent for a long time, but finally told Yan Qi to gather those 30 people. Yan Qi froze, asking if only 30. Haifeng Fort has at least 200 men. I just said coldly, that's enough. Then I told Ironhead to work through the night, to make 30 improved repeating crossbows, with twice the range of ordinary bows and arrows, and gunpowder packed into small bamboo tubes, with the fuses left an extra foot long. That night, the sky was dark and the wind howled. I led 30 men, and we crept up the eastern slope of Haifeng Fort. That hillside still had no watchtowers, and no patrols. Just pitch-black woods. I led the way at the front. Yan Qi covered the rear. Everyone moved quietly. Even our breaths were held back. Once under the fort wall, I gave a hand signal, and 2 men climbed over, took out the gate guards, and opened the gate. All 30 of us slipped inside in single file. The fortress was silent, with only a few bonfires still burning. I avoided the main hall, heading straight for the rear compound, where prisoners were held. When we arrived, I spotted A Ning at once, tied to a wooden post, covered in blood, his clothes whipped to shreds, his exposed skin full of lash marks. His head hung motionless. 2 guards stood at his side, dozing off nearby. Yan Qi looked at me. I gave a small nod, and he immediately moved in, knife flashing. The 2 guards collapsed, to the ground. With my cane, I walked step by step to Aning, and as I got closer saw blood still dripping from him.
His fingers trembling slightly.
He was still alive. I reached out and lifted his face. He slowly opened his eyes, and when he saw it was me, his lips moved, softly called my name. I gently put Aning down. I turned and told Yan Qi to fire the rockets. 10 rockets shot into the sky at once, landing precisely on the granary and the armory. Dry wood met blazing fire. In an instant, a sea of fire erupted. The whole camp went into chaos. The thugs ran out shirtless in total confusion. Shouts of fire and enemy attack rang everywhere. I immediately ordered Yan Qi to lead 10 men in a frontal assault. He raised his black sword and charged bravely out. Blades flashed everywhere. Anyone in the way was cut down. Screams echoed nonstop. Sword glints reflected in the firelight. The battle was particularly fierce. I led the rest to higher ground. 20 repeater crossbows aimed down from above, specifically targeting any leaders trying to rally a counterattack. 1 arrow, 1 target, never missing a shot. Soon, Zhao Wuji charged out wielding a broadsword. His body tattoos looked especially ferocious in the flames. He spotted me immediately and charged at me with a cruel grin, threatening to split me apart alive. I stood my ground, perfectly still, watching him approach step by step. When he was only 10 paces away, I took out a gunpowder bamboo tube, lit the fuse and threw it over. The tube rolled to his feet and exploded with a thunderous bang. Sparks burst in all directions. Zhao Wuji screamed and was blasted backward. Half his body was charred black. Yan Qi seized the opportunity to rush forward, and with a swing of his blade, he chopped off Zhao Wuji's head. The battle ended quickly. I leaned on my cane and walked to the center of the camp, told all the thugs to gather. Over 500 men trembled in fear. I told them, Haifeng camp no longer existed starting today. Those who wanted to leave could take 3 taels of silver and go. Those who wished to stay could follow me. In the end, 200 of the 500 left. 300 chose to remain. At sunrise, I led these 300 men and all the supplies back to the village. Qingluo saw me covered in blood and rushed over crying. I patted her head. I comforted her, saying it was all someone else's blood. After Jingyu checked on Ning carefully,
He said Aning's life was saved.
but he'd need half a year to recover. I breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly asked about the wild ginseng. Jiyu's mouth twitched a bit, said there was one right in Haifeng camp's storeroom. He'd just seen it earlier. I was stunned for a moment, then laughed out loud. Of the 300 people left from Haifeng camp, I couldn't support all of them, so I put Yanji in charge of selection. Those who could fight or had skills and were hardworking could stay. The rest received silver and were dismissed. 3 days later, the list was finalized. Only 150 remained. Tutu looked at the list, eyes wide, and asked how we would feed these 150 mouths. What would we use to support them? He asked. I told him, by farming. The wasteland behind the mountain could be turned into farmland. Anning's wounds had not fully healed, but he insisted on getting up with a cane, saying he'd lead men to clear the land. I hurriedly pushed him back in bed, sent the older kids in the village instead, made him in charge of watering. Anning sulked, but after I glared at him, he finally laid back down obediently. A month later, the village looked entirely different. Tito's blacksmith shop tripled in size. The clanging of metal rang from dawn till dusk. Chinjiu's clinic was built as well. Thatched huts were replaced with brick houses. There was a line at the door every day. Even people from outside villages came for treatment. 20 mu of land was reclaimed behind the mountain. Fresh green seedlings had already sprouted. Anning walked around the fields with his cane every day, looking after the crops more tenderly than his own brother. Meanwhile, Qingluo happily counted the accounts daily, telling me we saved another 20 taels of rice this month. The storage vats were full. There was enough from the vegetable gardens. I asked a question. while flipping through the newly delivered accounts. The cost of food, clothing, and supplies for 150 people. Every day started with money issues. But things were much better than a month ago. Qian Mangguan heard that I wiped out Haifeng camp and fled to the county seat in the night, terrified. Zhao Go disappeared. Some said he ran north. Others said he joined another bandit camp. I had no time to worry about such trivialities. Then came news from Liu Rushi. She said 5th Master Zhou had been unusually active in the county seat lately, apparently contacting someone. I handed the note to An Ning, telling him to keep an eye on things in town. Reminded him to be extremely careful. An Ning took the note and tucked it into his chest, grabbed his hunting bow, and headed out. His wound still hadn't fully healed, so he walked with a limp. Still, he wanted some extra income. 3 days later, An Ning came back. His expression wasn't good. He came in and gulped down a bowl of water first. After a pause, he looked up and told me that the person Zhou Wai met was the steward of Prince Zhenen's household. 2 days later, a group of people arrived in the village. The leader, a middle-aged man, wore a silk robe, with a gentle, friendly smile on his face. There were a dozen attendants behind him, as well as Sun Bo and several familiar officers. He cupped his hands at me as soon as he arrived, enthusiastically calling me Top Scholar Liu. He said his surname was Wu, and he was from Prince Zhenen's mansion. Hearing Prince Zhenen's mansion repeatedly, I felt a chill inside, but my face didn't show it at all. I hurriedly welcomed him, saying it was an honor, and apologized for failing to greet him from afar. Chief Steward Wu waved it off, but his gaze was already wandering around the village. He took a look at Tito's blacksmith shop, then at Chinjiu's clinic and the newly opened fields. Finally, his eyes lingered on me for a long time. Still smiling, he praised the way I managed the village efficiently. His tone didn't reveal any emotion. I replied humbly, saying it was just a remote, poor village, and we were simply trying to make a living. He nodded, walked around the village with his hands behind his back, stopped on purpose at the blacksmith shop, peeking inside for quite some time. He watched T2 hammer away, bare-chested, sparks flying around him. He also examined the newly made farm tools for a long while, then turned back to praise the blacksmith's skills. I again replied humbly, saying he was just a rural craftsman, good only at making hoes and sickles. He didn't say anything more, led his men onward. After a few steps, he stopped to look around and asked a few harmless questions. I accompanied him forward, but felt heavier inside with every step. I saw them to the village entrance. He got on his horse, looked back at me, giving me a cold, piercing glance that made my back go cold. When I got home, the fox with the jade face slipped in through the back door, asking if everything was safely hidden. I told him it was all stashed deep in the mountains, where not even immortals could find it. But I still couldn't calm down inside. I knew Chief Steward Wu had clearly noticed something. 3 days later, someone banged on the courtyard door. Qingluo went to open the door. Her face turned pale instantly. Sun Bao was standing at the door with a fake smile. He delivered a message saying the county magistrate had summoned me. Yan Qi blocked the doorway. He advised me not to go to the county office. He said clearly it was a trap. I looked at him. I told him if I didn't go, it would only look suspicious. Only by going could I find out their true intentions. Yan Qi insisted on going in with me. I patted his shoulder and turned him down. I told him to wait outside the city with 30 men. If I didn't come out in an hour, they should charge in to rescue me. Yan Qi was silent for a while. Eventually, he nodded in agreement.
He had a soft armor made for me overnight.
Just a thin layer, worn underneath my clothes. You could barely see it. I put on a worn cotton coat, used a cane to walk, and went into the city alone. At the entrance of the county office, Sun Bao was already waiting. He still wore that fake smile. He led me through 2 gates and into the main hall. County Magistrate Wei Zhong sat in the main seat, rubbing his hands non-stop, looking extremely uneasy. Steward Wu stood next to him, still with his ever-smiling face. Wei Zhong stood up to greet me. He even poured me tea himself. After I sat down, I didn't touch the tea. I directly asked why he called for me. Wei Zhang started rubbing his hands even faster. He looked at me, then at Steward Wu. He couldn't say a complete sentence for quite a while. Steward Wu saw this and spoke on his behalf. He said that the Prince of Zhenan wanted to recruit soldiers in our county. 500 and our village is thriving with people. He wanted to take them from our village. As soon as I heard about recruiting 500 soldiers, I immediately understood. They intended to rob me of my foundation. I turned to Wei Zhang. I told him recruiting was a good thing, but 500 was too many. Our village barely has a little over 1,000 people. There aren't even 200 young and able men. Before Wei Zhang could answer, a voice came from behind the screen suggesting to just take 200. Right after, Steward Wu came out from behind the screen. He looked at me with his smiling eyes. Looking at him, I suddenly laughed. I agreed to provide 200 men. Then I made my own request to see someone. Hearing I wanted to see someone, Steward Wu's expression instantly changed. He hastily asked why I wanted to see the princess. I looked straight into his eyes and told him I wanted to ask the princess why she tried to harm me back then. Steward Wu was silent for a long time. The room was so quiet you could only hear the candles crackling. Wei Zhang shrank into his chair. Hardly dared to breathe. Cold sweat beaded up on his forehead. At long last, Steward Wu spoke. His voice was low and deep. He said the princess was now under house arrest in a secluded mansion to the west of the city. But I couldn't see her. There were people guarding the place. I told him whether I could see her or not was my business. He just needed to tell me where she was. Steward Wu stared at me. His gaze seemed to try to see right through me. He finally nodded slowly after a long time. I got up, gave a fist salute to Wei Zhang, thanked him for his hospitality. Wei Zhang smiled awkwardly, not knowing what to do with his hands. He just kept saying, "All right." I left the county office leaning on my cane. Yan Ji was waiting for me in the outer hall. He sighed in relief when he saw me come out. Hurriedly asked what happened. I lowered my voice and told him to get ready. We were going to the secluded mansion to the west of the city tonight. It was a dark and windy night. The walls of the western residence weren't very high. Yan Ti scaled the wall first. Shortly after, he opened the side door. I went in on my cane, passed through 2 corridors, and into a moon gate. I saw a room with its lights on. A slender silhouette was cast on the paper window. I crept closer to the window, held my breath and peeked through a crack. Inside was a delicate dressing table, a carved wooden bed. Several plates of pastries sat on the table, and a pot of steaming hot tea. A young woman in plain-colored clothes was sitting by the window, lost in thought by the lamplight. Her side profile was very calm. She didn't look the least bit haggard from captivity. The princess wasn't living in a cell, but in a boudoir. I was stunned in place. Full of doubt. Was she really under house arrest? I gently pushed open the window, slipped inside. When the princess suddenly turned back and saw me, her whole body froze. She opened her mouth, wanting to scream but unable to make a sound. I stood my ground, leaning on my cane, and told her not to be afraid. I just had a few questions. She stared at me for a long time. The candlelight illuminated her face, making her look even younger than I imagined. She couldn't be more than 18 or 19. Her features were delicate, but her eyes were filled with deep exhaustion. Her voice trembling, she asked who I was. I told her I was Lu Chan. I asked if she remembered me. She hesitated for a moment, then tears suddenly streamed down her face. She covered her mouth and sobbed uncontrollably. She kept apologizing to me, saying it was all her fault. I watched her cry coldly. I only asked why. She raised her tear-stained face, choking up, and said she hadn't wanted to. It was Prince Zunan, her father, who forced her. She said if she didn't obey, he'd kill her wet nurse. She had lost her mother at a young age, and it was the wet nurse who raised her. She had no choice at all. She clenched the hem of her clothes, her knuckles turning white. She said there was something in the wine that night, and she had no idea what happened. When she woke up, I was lying beside her. The guards then rushed inside. At this point, she couldn't speak any further. She buried her head, shaking all over. I watched her cry for a long time. Then I asked her why Prince Zema wanted to harm me. She looked up with red eyes and said it was because I was a military champion from humble origins. Prince Zena was afraid the emperor would promote me, and I would threaten his position. Outside, the night watchman's clapper echoed. Each sound seemed to hit my heart. I looked at her and asked if she would help me if I wanted to bring down her father. Would she be willing to help me? She was stunned, tears still on her face, but her gentle eyes turned hesitant, then became incredibly determined. She only said one word, help. I asked if the princess had any evidence against Prince Zonnan. She shook her head, crying, said everyone who knew about that night was dealt with by her father. She had no evidence at all. In the silence, she suddenly grabbed my sleeve and said, only her wet nurse, who cared for her for 15 years, knew the truth. The wet nurse was driven out of the prince's mansion after the incident, and her whereabouts remain unknown. But she was willing to testify. Yet she had searched for a long time and still couldn't find her. I gently pulled back my sleeve, told her I would search for her. As I turned to leave, she grabbed my hand, her voice trembling as she asked if I hated her. I looked at him, sobbing by candlelight, his shoulders shaking. After a long silence, I said I once did. But not anymore. He was stunned, then started to cry and laugh at the same time. I didn't look back, just walked straight out of the wing. When I returned to the village, I immediately summoned Jade Fox, told him to search for the wet nurse expelled from Prince Zuanan's estate. The wet nurse who was living incognito. Jade Fox didn't ask much and left right away. A month later, news arrived. The wet nurse, under an assumed name, had married a farmer in the countryside near Qingzhou. I sent Yan Qi to fetch her personally. 3 days later, Yan Qi was carried back to the village. She was covered in blood, with wounds on her back and arms deep enough to show bone. The wet nurse followed behind her, trembling in fear, but completely unharmed. I rushed over and supported her. She forced a smile and said, I brought her back. Then she fainted. Qingjiu quickly carried her into the clinic. I stood there motionless and searched the attackers and found a badge engraved with Prince Zeanan's insignia. Chief Wu showed up again, followed by 200 palace guards. They filled the village entrance, their swords drawn and bows at the ready, with overwhelming momentum. He sat on horseback, smiling as he conveyed the prince's orders, telling me to enter the estate as a strategist, telling me to go with him at once. I stood at the entrance leaning on my cane and refused him flatly. Chief Wu's smile didn't change, but his eyes grew hostile. He forcefully declared it wasn't up to me. He raised his hand, about to order an attack. Right then, shouts of battle came from the hillside outside the village. 300 men I had arranged earlier charged out of the forest, surrounding the palace guards. Yan Qi and Shimo Dao stood at the very front, their murderous aura intense. Chief Wu's face turned deathly pale, shouting furiously, asking if I was rebelling. I laughed and questioned whether he was leading troops, conscripting civilian labor by force, breaking into private homes. According to the laws of Daying, what crime does that deserve? He was stunned on the spot, unable to say a word. I told him I wasn't rebelling, just acting in self-defense. Chief Wu's face turned from pale to blue, speechless. I waved and told Yanji and the others to tie him up. Yanji immediately dragged Chief Wu off his horse and tied him up tightly. He yelled threats that the prince wouldn't let me get away with this. I ignored him completely. I turned and went back inside, wrote a letter, sealed it, and handed it to Ning. Instructed him to send someone to the capital's inspectorate by express. Ning took the letter, uncertainly asked if this would help. I replied calmly whether it worked or not. We'd only know if we tried. Half a month later, someone came to report at the village entrance, saying someone arrived from the capital. I was relieved and went out leaning on my cane, thinking it was someone from the inspectorate. But when I saw who it was, my heart instantly sank. It wasn't from the inspectorate, but from Prince Zhennan's estate. The person was an old man, with graying hair, dressed in a dusty gray robe, with a kind smile on his face. If it weren't for the 50 black-clad masked assassins behind him, he would have looked like a kindly old neighbor. He greeted me with a smile, calling me top scholar Lu, relaying the prince's message, demanding I hand over the wet nurse and the princess, and promising he'd let bygones be bygones. As he spoke, he waved his hand, and 50 men in black drew their swords in unison, radiating killing intent. I stood firm, leaning on my cane. Yan Qi stepped forward, sword across to shield me. The 300 men behind him surged from all over the village, completely surrounding the black-clad men. The old man glanced at Yan Qi, mocked him as a crippled soldier daring to block his path. Before he finished, he shot forward like a shadow, striking at my chest with his palm. I had no time to dodge. Just as the gust from his palm reached me, a white blur stepped in front to shield me. There was a dull thud. Jade Fox forcibly took the hit, his body wavering slightly, blood seeping from the corner of his mouth. But he didn't take a single step back. The old man's face changed drastically, recognizing him as a remnant of the deposed crown prince. Jade Fox wiped the blood from his mouth and sneered, calling him an old dog. The old man was furious, striking again with a palm full of mist, then instantly swung his blade horizontally, and Jade Fox also attacked at the same time. The three instantly broke into battle. Shadows crossed and mingled. Blades flashed and palms clashed. I immediately ordered them to shoot arrows. The crossbowmen hidden above all fired in unison. Arrows rained down. The men in black fell one after another. Their screams echoed nonstop. The old man saw things were going badly. He struck out with his palm and retreated. The jade-faced fox used the force to leap back. In a few moves, he disappeared outside the village. The remaining men in black were either dead or wounded. One by one, they knelt on the ground and surrendered. I rushed over to help the jade-faced fox. His face was deathly pale. Blood was still seeping from the corner of his mouth. I was both anxious and angry. I asked why he'd force himself to take that blow. But he smiled and said if I died, there'd be no one left to avenge him. Just then, the old man's shriek sounded from afar, like an owl. He yelled that the prince wouldn't let us go, and would send an army within 3 months to crush us. I gathered everyone together inside the house. Yan Qi spoke gravely. The Prince of Zhenan has 50,000 elite troops. Even if only 5,000 came, we could never hold out. Ironhead slammed his iron cane on the ground. Said we only had enough weapons to arm at most 500 people. We didn't even have proper heavy armor. Aning was flipping through the ledger, her brows tightly knit. We couldn't afford a war after 3 months. Everyone would go hungry. Even the usually calm, jade-faced fox leaned against the wall, his face pale, urging me that if things got too bad, we should retreat into the deep mountains, at least to save everyone's lives. Everyone's eyes focused right on me. I stayed silent for a long time. Finally, I told them, word by word, we're not retreating. We'll fight right here. I pushed myself up with my cane, pointed at the map spread out on the table, issued strict orders one by one. Had Ironhead dismantle lumber and stone from Blackwind Stronghold. Build 10 catapults. Deploy them on the high ground behind the village. Craft 500 giant python stakes. Lay out 3 lines of defense with traps. The more mechanical devices, the better. Smoke Squad's expansion to 300 isn't enough. We need to recruit 1,000 people. Everyone who can and is willing to fight from nearby villages are all to be recruited. 1 month later, I want to see a force ready for battle. Aning is to lead people, to dig 3 water-filled trenches in front of the village, and 3 bottomless tunnels behind the village. Store food well for the old, weak, women, and children. Keep escape routes open. Send the jade-faced fox to contact all forces nearby we can ally with. Include the militia from northern neighbor village. Tell them if we're gone, they're next in trouble. The jade-faced fox looked at me, The corner of his lips raised slightly. Not a single person present backed down. Everyone firmly accepted the orders. A month later, the village was completely transformed. 3 trenches blocked the front of the village. The stables were tightly packed with horses, not an inch to spare. 10 catapults stood tall on the high ground. Their dark throwing arms aimed to the distance. Food and the women and children were hidden in the tunnels behind the village. And on the morning of the 2nd month, a scout galloped into the village. When he dismounted, his face was ashen. He loudly reported Genin Prince's 5,000-strong army was here. They'll be at the village gates within 5 days. News spread of Genin Prince's force arriving in 5 days. The village was immediately thrown into chaos. Rumors spread everywhere. People were in panic. Some rushed to flee the village for their lives. Some feared authority and wanted to surrender. In the chaotic lives, all people felt was fear of the unknown battle. At night, some secretly slipped out toward the county town. They were caught on the spot by Eunuch G, old Black Wind stronghold soldiers now under our command. Next morning, in front of everyone in the village, I executed the traitorous deserter. His head fell. Blood splattered 3 feet. The previously noisy crowd instantly went dead silent. I stood with my cane, looked at everyone in front of me, and said one thing: anyone who wants to leave can do it now. I will not stop you. But for those who stay, Lu Chun promises, as long as I'm alive, the village will not fall. When I finished speaking, Aning was the first to stand before me. Qing Luo followed closely behind me without leaving my side, using silence to show her determination to fight to the death. Ironhead cursed as he came forward with his iron cane. Even the usually cool jade-faced fox walked slowly up. One by one, the villagers lined up. No one in the village backed down. Everyone entrusted their lives and fortunes to me, this cripple who was once thrown into a mass grave. That night, no one in the village slept. I sat on a stone at the entrance of the village, staring at the deep, impenetrable darkness in the distance. The princess sat down beside me, softly asked if I was scared. I looked at the endless night and said I was. But I'm more afraid of being a helpless cripple for life. She didn't say anything else, just quietly rested her head on my shoulder. Suddenly, the first streak of fire tore through the sky. The scout ran over hurriedly. He rolled off the horse before it even stopped. Shouting, he cried out that kept everyone tense. At least 5,000 have arrived. Dawn barely broke. The ground trembled. I stood on the stronghold walls with my cane. Watched the 5,000-strong army approach, black as night. Banners blocked out the sun. Dust filled the sky. Genin Prince's champion, Iron Leopard, led the charge. He stopped his horse 5 miles out. Watched for a while. Then sent 300 cavalry as the vanguard. They charged toward the village. The thunder of hooves made the earth shake. When the cavalry got to 300 paces from the village, those in front fell with their horses, flipping over suddenly. They fell into the chain traps we had dug ahead of time. Before the rest could react, the crossbowmen ambushed on both sides fired in unison. Dozens more dropped instantly. The surviving soldiers threw down their armor and fled in panic, leaving over 100 bodies behind. Our first battle was a victory. The village erupted in cheers. But I knew in my heart, this was just Iron Leopard's probing. The real vicious battle is still far from over. Iron Leopard didn't rush the attack. He camped 5 miles out, sent a messenger to persuade us to surrender, threatened to massacre the village, demanded I hand over the nanny and princess. I didn't waste words with him. Had the messenger bring back my reply, tell Iron Leopard to wash his neck clean, and wait. The jade-faced fox came by my side. I set the plan with him. Iron Leopard's 5,000-strong army came from far away. Their supply line stretches 300 miles. They can't afford to wear us down. We need to stand our ground for 3 days first. Once he splits forces to transport food, that will be our moment to counterattack. That night, we began our counterattack. A sentinel stumbled in to report. Taibo has indeed split off 1,000 troops. They're heading north. I led Yanqi and 300 elite soldiers. We set out under the cover of darkness. We marched swiftly for 30 miles. Crossed over 2 mountain ridges. Taibao's supply camp suddenly appeared right in front of us. Over 100 neatly arranged grain carts. The soldiers guarding the supplies were dozing by the campfires in small groups. They were completely unprepared for the coming raid. I signaled the unit to halt. At my command, 300 flaming arrows shot up at once. Trailing fiery tails, they crashed straight into the piles of grain carts. Dry wood meets raging fire. In an instant, the place was engulfed in a blazing inferno. While the enemy was thrown into chaos, Yanji led his men out from the woods to launch an attack. Blades whirled. They tore through the enemy lines as easily as slicing melons. In less than half an hour, more than half the supply guards were killed or wounded. The surviving soldiers all dropped to their knees and begged for mercy. We didn't pause for a second. With the confusion, we withdrew from the battlefield. We hurried back to the village before dawn. Yumian Fox was already at the village entrance, holding a lantern and waiting. He firmly believed Taibao, fueled by supplies, would launch a full-scale assault the next day. I was already prepared. All defensive lines had been arranged, just waiting for him to come. Early next morning, the thunderous war drums ripped through the dust. Taibao personally led 3,000 troops in a full-scale attack. Bringing siege ladders and battering rams, a black mass surged aggressively toward the village. One immediately gave the order.
10 catapults fired at once.
Millstone-sized rocks howled as they smashed into the enemy ranks. Men and horses were thrown into chaos instantly. But the enemy soldiers were fearless and relentless. They climbed over their comrades' corpses and rushed all the way to the fortress walls with siege ladders. Ladders were quickly hooked onto the walls. Yanji led, his men in a desperate defense of the lines. The battle entered its most intense phase immediately. Right at the most critical moment of the fight, a villager stumbled in and sprinted wildly. Pale-faced, he shouted, "Something's wrong." Another army was spotted on the western mountain. At least 2,000 men. My heart tightened. I saw a mass of shadows moving across the western mountain. At least 2,000 people were moving this way. We were instantly surrounded and caught in a pincer. I hurriedly ordered reinforcements to the west. I hadn't even finished my sentence when Jade Fox grabbed my hand. He smiled, saying those people were his. I was stunned on the spot. He explained that they were 300 men left from Blackwind Fortress, plus the militias from 7 nearby villages. From the first day Iron Leopard arrived, he had sent people to make contact. He said these men had agreed to help, with the condition that I protect their villages in the future. I looked at him. From the bottom of my heart, I thanked him. But he simply smiled and said I should thank myself, because it was me who gave these people hope. As soon as he finished, the 2,000 people on the mountain charged down. They crashed fiercely into Iron Leopard's army from the flank. Iron Leopard was attacking head-on with full force, and caught off guard, their formation fell into chaos. The soldiers couldn't care for those ahead or behind. I shouted for Yan Qi to charge forward. Yan Qi was already waiting for orders, and immediately led 300 men out of the main gate. Blades sharp as a forest, headed straight for the center. With attacks on 3 sides, Iron Leopard's army was destroyed. Soldiers scattered and fled in all directions, descending into utter chaos. Even as Iron Leopard fought desperately, killing several men, he was still struck down by the arriving Yang Qi. After the battle, I walked to the center of the field with my cane. Corpses littered the ground, blood flowing everywhere. But the surviving men were all cheering. Jade Fox silently followed behind me. I crouched down and searched Iron Leopard's body, finding a personal letter from Prince Zhang Nan. On it were only a few lines. On the day the village falls, old and young men and women, leave no one alive. All must be killed. Yan Qi and I defeated Iron Leopard with good tactics. It took an entire day to count the aftermath. 2,000 enemies eliminated, 1,000 captured. The confiscated weapons and armor piled up like a small mountain. Tai Tu was grinning from ear to ear. But I stayed in Iron Leopard's tent, going through the seized letters. Most were orders, deployments, and supply lists. Until I opened the last, unmarked but exquisite piece of stationery. I stopped instantly. On it was written, Lu Chun, this person must be eliminated. Not because she is Princess Nayang, but because she is a zeroer. I called Jade Fox into the tent. When he saw the letter, his face changed dramatically. His hands trembled slightly, and he muttered zeroer over and over. A hint of fear flashed in his eyes. I asked him what a zeroer was. He was silent for a long time, before saying that the zeros were a secret left by the previous dynasty. A group of people was to be chosen, and special methods would give them memories of their past lives. Those words exploded in my mind like thunder. After all, I came from the modern world. Of course I have memories of my previous life. Jade Fox looked at me, his expression complicated. He added that if Prince Nan knows I'm a zeroer, he surely has others behind him. Jade Fox used every connection he had, investigating the black market, the authorities, traveling merchants, and wanderers alike. He used every possible channel. He left early each morning and returned late each night, his expression growing heavier day by day. Half a month later, he brought news, saying there's a more powerful force backing Prince Nan. It's called the Returners Society. Their goal is to find all returners and wipe them out. I asked him why. He went silent for a moment, then whispered, Returners know the real reason the previous dynasty fell. And in my original memories, fragments of the past dynasty occasionally flashed by, and Prince Zhonnan's figure was always there. I fell silent. So I've been targeted from the very beginning? I wasn't dragged into this by accident. Jade Fox asked what I planned to do. I told him, since they're looking for me, I'll go find them myself. The next day I called for Aning, gave him a bag of silver and a letter, and told him to find a way into Prince Zhonnan's residence, to uncover the truth about the Returners Society. I also urged him to be careful, and that if things got dangerous to remain secret. Aning took the letter, nodded and smiled, saying he's hard to kill. He set out right after. A month went by. No news from Aning. Another month passed, and still nothing. It wasn't until week 6, someone delivered a letter stained with dried blood. Inside was only a wrinkled piece of paper with Aning's handwriting. It had only one word. Seeing this, I immediately took Yan Qi and 20 elite soldiers, disguised as a merchant caravan, and hurried day and night to the capital. The road was full of checkpoints, and local officials inspected travelers in every town and county. Relying on silver to smooth things over, we passed without further trouble. We traveled at night, rested by day. Everyone was exhausted, but no one dared to stop. Each day we delayed put Aning in greater danger. Half a month later, we finally reached the capital. The city walls towered above us. Outside the gate stood Liu Ru and Liu Shi waiting for us. They looked worried as they told me. Aning had been captured and taken to the dungeons beneath Prince Zhuannan's residence. His fate unknown. I gripped my cane tighter, my knuckles turning white, and asked about the mansion's defenses. He said the prince kept 300 guards inside, patrolling day and night. With layer upon layer of sentries, rescuing anyone was next to impossible. I didn't give up. I had Liu Ru Shi get a map of the mansion. I spent a whole night at the inn studying it, memorizing every detail. The next day, I had rumors spread through the capital, saying the previous dynasty's treasure had been found at Mount Laojian. By midday, it was the talk of the city. On the third day, Prince Zhonnan indeed left to investigate. As soon as he was gone, Yan Qi and I went to the back wall of his mansion, climbed over avoiding patrols, and soon reached the dungeon entrance. But there we found Steward Wu standing guard, with more than a dozen armed men behind him. He looked at me, smiling, like he was waiting for an old friend. "Top Scholar Liu," he said, his voice amused. "I've been waiting for you a long time." Steward Wu stood there with his guards, all smiling as they waited for me. He said the prince knew I would come, The news of Aning being caught was bait. Aning wasn't in the mansion at all, but had been sent to a villa outside the city. I looked at his smug face and laughed, asking if he thought I'd only brought 2 people. As soon as I finished, shouts of killing erupted outside the courtyard wall. The 20 elite men I'd left outside scaled the wall, attacking from behind. The guards' formation fell apart instantly. Steward Wu's face turned ashen. Before he could even shout, Yan Qi charged up and cut him down with one stroke. Yan Qi then roared and led his men into the fight. And in the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, all the guards were dead or had fled. I rushed into the dungeon, but found it completely empty. Only iron chains and traces of blood remained. I ordered to set the fire. The flames spread quickly, lighting up half the night sky. We escaped the palace amidst the chaos, rushed to the villa outside the city. At the villa we found Aning. He was tied to a pillar. His whole body was bruised. His clothes were stained with blood. When he saw me, he smiled and said he knew I would come. I hurriedly cut the ropes and held him. I asked what he was interrogated about. He answered weakly but firmly. They were asking about the returner. He didn't say a thing. And then he passed out. Qingjiu was far away in the village and couldn't make it. Aning's injuries were too severe. His wounds had turned black, and his fever wouldn't break. I had Liu Rushi bring the best doctor in the capital. After taking his pulse, the doctor shook his head and said he could only keep Aning alive. To fully cure him, he must use a century-old blood ginseng found only in the palace. I went silent. The palace was another world entirely, let alone getting in to retrieve medicine. Even approaching the gates was a capital crime. Just as I was at a loss, Jade Fox said the princess was in the palace and might be able to help. I was very curious. Wasn't the princess under house arrest? Jade Fox just gave a meaningful smile. He told me the princess had been released back to the palace by Prince Zuan Nan to fend for herself. I immediately asked him to contact the princess. 3 days later, the princess sent word by someone. She said she could provide the medicine, but I had to come to the palace myself, looking at Aning in his fever, still calling his brother's name. I made up my mind to go into the palace personally. On the day I entered the palace, the sunlight was perfect. I followed the eunuch through gate after gate, but saw the emperor himself in the imperial garden. He wore a bright yellow robe. Standing under an old plum tree, he turned and smiled at me, Returner Luchan. He had been waiting for me for a long time. In the imperial garden, the emperor gently waved his hand. The accompanying eunuchs withdrew like a tide. In the vast garden, only he and I remained. The wind rustled the ancient plum tree. A few dead leaves fell on his shoulder. He didn't move at all, he calmly told me. The Returner project was started by the previous emperor. Its goal was to bring people from the future to help Great Indu through its crisis. I understood in my heart, though I traveled here. In his eyes, I was the so-called Returner. I hurriedly asked what crisis he faced. His gaze was deep.
He said directly that Prince Zenan intended to rebel.
He had allied with 5 regional princes, planning to launch troops next spring. He needed me to help. I was momentarily stunned. He then said he knew I had a blood feud with Prince Zenan, willing to grant me military command. Go and suppress the rebellion. Once it's done, he would clear my name and make me a prince. I stared at his face intently, but all I saw was calmness. Couldn't help but ask why he chose me. He smiled and said, as a returner, I knew future history. Surely I knew why prince rebellions failed. I remained silent. Of course I knew. Grain, morale, timing, even betrayal by confidants. All critical weaknesses. I looked up and asked back. Wasn't he afraid I'd rebel after I got command?
He said calmly, if he dared grant me command.
Then he feared nothing. I was silent for a long time. Finally knelt and accepted his decree. The emperor nodded, took out the command token and threw it to me, ordering me to lead the troops and quell the rebellion. He'd keep his promise when I returned victorious. I took the command token, turned to leave. Behind me, he cautioned that just as he gave me everything, he could take it all back. Prince Zenan allied with 5 regional princes and rebelled, claimed to have 200,000 troops, but actually had just over 100,000. I only had 50,000 soldiers, and they were all inexperienced miscellaneous troops. Once the battle flags were raised, Even the soldiers themselves felt uneasy. Yan Qi asked how we should fight this battle. I told him we had to rely on our brains. First, I had rumors spread among the rebel camps, saying the regional princes were only pretending to cooperate. Each had their own plans. Some were even secretly contacting the court to surrender. The rumors spread for 3 days. Soon unrest grew within the rebel forces. Next, I sent people disguised as rebel envoys to sneak into a regional prince's tent at night and left behind a secret letter. The next day, that letter unexpectedly ended up in Prince Zhongnan's hands. He read it and flew into a rage. That day, he sent the prince's troops to the rear to guard supplies, demoting him quietly, directly stripping him of military command. That night, I led my troops to move under cover of darkness, targeting the rebel supply camp 30 miles away. Their camp held 50,000 loads of grain piled high. I gave the order to fire arrows. 1,000 arrows flew all at once. The flames soared to the sky. The grain burned all night. When dawn came, the rebel camp was in chaos, with no supplies left. Morale collapsed. The soldiers began to flee. I drew my sword immediately, ordered a full assault. 50,000 main troops pushed forward head-on. Yan Qi led the cavalry in a flank attack. Ironhead's trebuchets covered from the rear. The rebels instantly fell apart. Prince Zhongnan was dragged before me, hair in disarray. Yet he burst into wild laughter, sighed, "I thought I won," and bragged he had even bigger backers behind him. The Prince of Zhenan was brought into the tent in custody. He was tightly bound and forced to kneel on the ground. I sat across from him, staring him down relentlessly. There wasn't a hint of fear in my eyes, only mockery. I pressed him for the mastermind behind everything. I even bluntly asked if it was the Empress Dowager, but he just laughed. He remained completely silent the whole time. When pressed, he simply sneered. He looked like a dead pig unfazed by boiling water. I walked out of the tent. Jade Fox was waiting outside. He said he wanted to interrogate him for me. I felt full of suspicion, but Jade Fox went straight into the tent. I waited outside. Inside, only a few whispers could be heard. One incense stick later, Jade Fox came out. His face was deathly pale, and he was trembling all over. I'd never seen him look like that before. I immediately pressed for the real culprit. He told me in a trembling voice that the mastermind was the Empress Dowager. She was actually the Prince of Zhenan's own sister. I was stunned on the spot. She was the Emperor's biological mother, after all. Jade Fox went on. The Empress Dowager hated the Emperor, because the Emperor wasn't her own flesh and blood. She supported the Prince of Zhenan's rebellion, just to have him take the throne. The Prince of Zhenan also confessed. The Empress Dowager had a jade pendant engraved with the names of the Emperor's biological parents. It could prove the Emperor's lineage. My heart sank. If this came to light, there would be an earthquake in the imperial court. The feudal princes would stir, and foreign enemies might invade. The consequences would be unimaginable. 3 days later, I secretly escorted the Prince of Zhenan to the capital, handing him over to the Emperor myself. After reading the confession, the Emperor's face turned ashen.
He sat silently on the dragon throne for a long time.
There was a deathly silence in the hall. I waited as patiently as I could. After a long pause, he finally looked up at me. That look was impossible to decipher. I couldn't understand it at all. That night, the Prince of Zhenan died in prison. The coroner falsely claimed he hanged himself out of guilt, but his tongue was black and swollen, blood coming from every orifice. He'd clearly been poisoned. The next day, the Emperor was assassinated. The assassin was killed on the spot, but not before stabbing the Emperor twice. The Emperor was severely wounded and fell into a coma. The Empress Dowager took the opportunity to seize control of the court. Citing the Emperor's critical condition, she began to rule from behind the curtain. Her first imperial order was targeted at me. She accused me of wielding troops to build my own power, suspecting me of treason. Yan Qi read the decree and was so furious he almost tore it up on the spot. I quickly stopped him. I knew very well the Empress Dowager was trying to kill me. But to me, This was also a chance to strike back. I immediately summoned Jade Fox and told him to contact all ministers loyal to the emperor to expose that the Empress Dowager poisoned the Prince of Zhenan to silence him and had people assassinate the emperor. I made the ministers sign a joint petition, forcing the Empress Dowager to hand over the murderer. Right after, I instructed Ning to make 100 copies of the Prince of Zhenan's confession and spread them throughout every corner of the capital. Tea houses, taverns, the city gates, the busiest markets. They were all plastered with them. I wanted to make the whole thing blow up. The bigger the scandal, the better for me. In just 3 days, the pile of joint petitions from the ministers became a mountain. Even commoners were discussing it everywhere. The Empress Dowager's schemes could no longer be hidden. On the 4th day, the Empress Dowager was desperate. She sent 5,000 imperial guards to surround my headquarters. Their swords were drawn, and their bows were drawn as the commander shouted in front of our lines, ordering me to surrender. Yan Qi stood guard by my side, his hand gripping his sword tightly. He asked what I intended to do. Looking at the sea of soldiers before me, I remained silent for a moment, then slowly uttered just one word. The Imperial Guard commander Zhou Zhong was the Empress Dowager's trusted aide. He sat atop his horse, with his chin held high, his sword pointing straight at me, yelling for me to surrender, or be executed without mercy. I stood at the headquarters entrance, quietly looking at him, saying not a single word. I waved my hand gently. Those behind me instantly raised the curtain launcher and shot the rolled-up confession into the ranks of the Imperial Guards. The papers fell like snow. When the soldiers picked them up and read them, their expressions quickly changed. Some trembled, others began whispering softly, everyone exchanging looks. They murmured about the Empress Dowager poisoning the Prince of Zhenan, saying the emperor wasn't her biological son. Zhou Zhong's face suddenly changed. He galloped furiously in front of the ranks, shouting at his men not to read them, and to throw them away immediately. He then ordered the attack. The Imperial Guard surged forward, but their spirit was clearly shaken. Yan Qi immediately led his men into the fight, while I stood still at the rear, not even blinking. As the battle raged on, dust rolled in from the distance. Jade Fox arrived with 30,000 troops. Volunteers and militia, all forces gathered. Now the Imperial Guards were attacked from both sides and collapsed in an instant. Some died, some surrendered. Others ran, and Zhou Zhong was captured alive. He was bound tightly, his bloodied face pushed before me. I looked straight at him, asking if he was loyal to the Empress Dowager or the Emperor. He clenched his teeth and stayed silent, with defiance in his eyes. I gave him 3 breaths, then said coldly, "Then let him die." Yan Qi swung his blade, and Zhou Zhong's head fell. I swung onto my horse, drew my sword and pointed ahead, shouting, "March on the capital." With 50,000 troops, we advanced towards the capital in full force. Hoofbeats thundered. Dust blocked out the sun. The gates in front of the palace were tightly shut. The Empress Dowager stood atop the city wall, dressed in splendid robes, and sneered that I was rebelling. I looked up at her, not raising my voice, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I am not rebelling. I am here to cleanse the Emperor's court." I looked up at the Empress Dowager on the city wall. My voice wasn't loud, but it spread clearly across the entire wall. I said solemnly, "I am not rebelling. I am here to cleanse the Emperor's court." When the Empress Dowager heard this, she let out a cold laugh, staring at me and retorting, "Cleansing the court? Cleansing whom?" I didn't answer. I just watched her quietly. Seeing this, the Empress Dowager suddenly waved her hand. A few people immediately carried the Emperor up the wall. I saw the Emperor covered in blood, his face paper white, already unconscious. He was carelessly placed atop the battlements, his body swaying about to fall. The Empress Dowager pointed at the Emperor, shouting, "I am holding this realm for the late Emperor. Who dares defy me?" Suddenly, a clear voice sounded from the wall. "You're the one defying the rules." The princess held a jade pendant in her hand, causing the Empress Dowager's face to change in shock and fury. She was utterly furious and stunned, barely spitting out the word, "You." The princess raised the jade pendant high, her crisp voice ringing across the wall, revealing the real origin of the pendant, saying it was engraved with the names of the emperor's real parents, who weren't members of the royal family at all. The crowd beneath the city gate erupted instantly. The princess spoke again, word by word, addressing the empress dowager. Supporting the prince of the south was just a scheme to put him on the throne, so she could keep control over the court. All these things, the prince of the south had already confessed before his death. The empress dowager was completely panicked. She reached out to snatch the jade pendant. The princess dodged aside. Using all her strength, the princess threw the jade pendant off the city gate. I immediately urged my horse forward, reached out to catch it. The jade pendant landed steadily in my palm. The empress dowager fell into utter despair. Her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the city gate. The imperial guards around looked at each other. They rushed forward and pinned her down. She screamed frantically that we were rebelling. But no one cared. 3 days later, the emperor woke up. The imperial doctor said his life was safe, but he needed to rest for half a year. I stood by the bed, looking at this young emperor who almost died at the hands of his own mother. He opened his eyes and saw it was me. He remained silent for a long time, and hoarsely asked me, "Lu Chen, what do you want?" The emperor woke up at the bedside. After a long silence, he hoarsely asked me, "Lu Chen, what do you want?" Later in the imperial study, the emperor asked me again what I wanted. A reward should I be made a prince and prime minister, or granted 10,000 taels of gold. I leaned on my cane, paused for a moment, told him I only wished to return. The emperor was clearly stunned, and asked me in confusion, after achieving such great merit, how could I just leave like this? I smiled, and told His Majesty, I came to the capital only to save Anning, not for rewards. Now that Anning is safe, it's time for me to go home. The emperor was silent for a long time. Eventually, he granted me the title of Marquis of Returning Loyalty, bestowed a county in Qingzhou as my fief, asked me to go back and guard the eastern gate for him. I knelt at once to thank him. When I stepped out of the palace gate, the princess ran after me. With red-rimmed eyes, she asked me, "Lu Chen, will you come to see me again?" I looked at her, and softly replied, "I will." When I returned to the village, everyone came out to welcome me. Qing Luo rushed forward and hugged me, refusing to let go, her eyes shining like stars. Anning's injuries had fully healed. He carried that hunting bow, taller than himself, grinning at me. Yan Seven stood at the back of the crowd, a faint smile on his lips. Ironhead's blacksmith shop was now 3 times bigger than before. Jade-faced Fox walked over and said to me, he was leaving, going to investigate the cause of his father's death years ago. Liu Rushi smiled and said he was staying in the capital, and would send someone to deliver messages if needed. Qing Jiyu, carrying a medicine chest, stood behind him, and said she wanted to follow Liu Rushi to see more strange medical cases. That night, the few of us drank for a long time, talking about the past and the road ahead. The next day, Jade-faced Fox, Liu Rushi, and Qing Jiyu departed on their separate journeys. The rest of us began a peaceful new life. I often stood on the rock at the entrance of the village, looking at the distant mountains, remembering the mass grave from the day I crossed over, recalling the blood splattered on my face when I killed the Wolf, thinking of the danger of the raging fire, the confrontation with the eunuch wife, the trust from Jade-faced Fox, and the princess's tears. At those moments, Qing Luo always came to my side and softly asked, "Brother Cheng, what are you thinking about?" I smiled and answered,
He's thinking this life was worth it.
The sunlight poured over me, warm and cozy. Suddenly, the sound of horse hooves echoed from afar. Who could it be? I don't know, but that is already another story.